It brings out the fragility of life, and everyone talks about it, that we never do it, really seize the moment, embrace it.
When Hollywood legends clash, the whole world takes notice. But when two of the biggest action stars in history stop speaking, every fan wants to know why.
Bruce, what he did with Die Hard, is again a definitive character. They don't, you align it to Rambo, but that's not true.
For years, Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis lit up the screen together, only to split in a feud that became headline news and left fans wondering what really happened behind the scenes. Was it pride, money, or something deeper that ended this partnership? Today, we pull back the curtain on the real story that changed both of their careers forever. What finally pushed Stallone to walk away, and could anything ever bring them back together? The making of a legend and the long road to friendship. Sylvester Stallone entered the world in a cramped hospital on a noisy street in Hell's Kitchen, New York. And from the very first breath, nothing about his life was easy or glamorous. The doctor's hands slipped just once, and the forceps pinched too tightly, leaving a permanent mark on his face and a slurred cadence in his voice that no acting coach would ever wish for, and no agent in Hollywood would ever consider a blessing. From that moment, the world never let him forget that he was different. The other children saw a target, and the teachers saw a problem, and everywhere Stallone looked, he found a reminder that he was on the outside looking in. His parents fought constantly. Their marriage splintered in the way so many do, and soon enough he was shuttled from one home to another, from one city to another, until it seemed like every memory was just another way station along a road with no destination. In Maryland, he tried to fit in, but found only new reasons to feel invisible. In Philadelphia, he wrestled with loneliness and the sort of anger that never quite leaves a person. His mother threw herself into the world of wrestling promotion, and his father into the art of hairstyling, and neither had much time for a son who did not fit the mold of a golden child. Still, Stallone kept searching for a reason to believe that his story would matter. He drifted through high school under a parade of nicknames and half-hearted friendships. Sometimes Tyrone, at his mother's insistence, but finally Sylvester, after his father won that small family war. Every time he moved, he lost a little more of himself. But with every loss, he discovered a new kind of resolve. He turned to bodybuilding to build strength where none had existed before, and acting to find a voice that could cut through all the noise of his uncertain childhood. College brought him to the University of Miami, but tuition and rent were constant battles. He washed in public restrooms, slept on benches when he had to, and took a part in an adult film simply because the alternative was hunger and shame. Stallone never pretended he was proud of it, but survival often leaves no room for pride, and every scar became just another part of the legend he was building, piece by battered piece. All those years of rejection and struggle fed into the story that would make him famous. One night, he watched a boxer named Chuck Wepner stand his ground against Muhammad Ali, and something inside him caught fire. He went home and in a fever of inspiration wrote the script for Rocky in just 3 days. No one in Hollywood wanted to cast him in the lead, but Stallone refused to sell unless he could play the part himself. Studios dangled names like Robert Redford and Burt Reynolds, and every agent told him he was crazy. But Stallone stood his ground, convinced that nobody else could tell this story. The bet paid off. Rocky exploded onto the scene, and the world embraced Stallone as its newest underdog hero. He walked red carpets and held trophies, but he never let himself forget how close he had come to failing before the world ever learned his name. Rocky was only the beginning. Stallone plunged headlong into the creation of Rambo, building his body and his filmography into monuments that would inspire generations. He learned to write not just for himself, but for anyone who wanted to believe in second chances. He directed, produced, acted, and hustled his way into the Hollywood pantheon, and with every new hit, a new legion of imitators tried to follow his path. Among those rising stars was Bruce Willis, a man whose own childhood had been marked by instability and a sense that he was always standing just outside the party. Willis carved out his niche with a different kind of charm, first in television and then in comedy, before exploding onto the big screen with Die Hard, a film that transformed him from everyman to icon in a single night. Suddenly, there were two men in Hollywood who had rewritten the rules on what it meant to be a leading man, both forged in hardship and both armed with nothing but their own stubbornness and the will to fight for every inch of ground they claimed. For years, they admired each other from a distance, their careers running on parallel tracks that sometimes intersected in headlines but rarely on set. Stallone was the blue-collar workhorse, the method actor who bled for his craft and expected nothing less from anyone who worked with him. Willis was the cool operator, the man with the sly grin and the razor wit, never rattled by pressure, always ready with a line that could break the tension and remind everyone that the whole business was just make-believe anyway. They became symbols of their era, two sides of the same battered coin, and fans dreamed of the day when their worlds would collide. That day finally came with The Expendables, a film that set out to unite every action star who had ever mattered and pack them into a single unstoppable force. On screen, their chemistry seemed effortless, the kind that draws in audiences and makes every explosion feel earned. But behind the scenes, old habits die hard. Stallone ran his set like a general, demanding discipline and respect from every cast member, never letting anyone forget that this project was as much about legacy as it was about box office receipts. Willis brought a different energy, at once relaxed and tightly controlled, always aware of the stakes, but never letting himself get drawn into the drama that swirled around the set. Every handshake was a calculation, every word measured, every joke a shield for old insecurities. Stallone saw in Willis a worthy equal, someone who understood what it meant to have been written off and yet claw your way back into the light. Willis saw in Stallone a man who would never let go of the past, even as the world tried to move on. As the Expendables franchise grew, so did the complications. Each new film meant more stars, more egos, more negotiations, and with every passing year, the stakes grew higher. Stallone wanted to prove that old-school action heroes still mattered, that loyalty and grit could still win out over youth and digital effects. Willis, for his part, was always looking for the next challenge, the next opportunity to show that he was more than a catchphrase or a punchline. By the time the conversation turned to a third film, the cracks had begun to show. There were whispers about money, about respect, about who deserved top billing and who was only in it for the paycheck. Stallone could sense the tension rising, but was never one to back down from a fight. If you imagine that the story ends with two legends shaking hands and walking into the sunset together, you do not understand how Hollywood really works. In this town, every alliance is temporary, and every truce is built on fragile ground. When the final bill comes due, you can choose to swallow your pride, or you can choose to set the whole thing on fire and walk away forever. Stallone and Willis were never just actors. They were survivors. And when the pressure became too much, and the old wounds started to bleed again, the choices they made would test everything they had built, both together and alone. What came next would not only shake the action world, but but force every fan to wonder if they ever really knew the men behind the legends, or if the stories that inspired us were always built on secrets that would one day come crashing down. The Expendables, the explosion, and the deal that split Hollywood. The Expendables was never pitched as just another action movie. From the first whisper in the trades, it was branded as a spectacle, a celebration, and a clash of icons. It was Stallone's grand experiment, a daring attempt to bring together all the weathered legends of the action genre and package them into a film that would remind audiences what it meant to see real muscle, real grit, and real personalities on the big screen. Stallone, who had survived the brutal cycles of fame and obscurity more than once, took this project personally. He poured himself into it as not only the lead actor, but as the architect, the mind who recruited every name, negotiated every contract, and set the tone both on and off camera. This was his baby, a defiant answer to every Hollywood executive who ever told him he was finished. A victory parade for all those who had once ruled the box office and now found themselves in the twilight of their careers. But with that ambition came a new kind of pressure, a gathering of stars so large and egos so carefully cultivated that every handshake, every bit of dialogue, every screen minute became a negotiation of pride, not just performance. Bruce Willis entered the fold with a legacy already cemented. Die Hard had made him a household name, a symbol of everyman resilience, the wise-cracking hero who walked barefoot over broken glass and always got the last word. His arrival was less about joining an ensemble and more about elevating the entire production, because Willis brought not just fans but credibility. If Stallone was the heart of the Expendables, Willis was the edge, the wild card who could steal a scene with a smirk. Yet beneath the public camaraderie and the well-rehearsed soundbites, there was always a current of competition, a subtle tallying of whose star power still shone brightest and whose name would get the final close-up. By the time work began on the third installment, that current had turned into something more charged. Movie budgets, by this stage in the franchise, had ballooned along with expectations, and every returning star understood just how valuable their presence was to fans and financiers alike. The rumors started quietly at first. Willis was reportedly offered $3 million for 4 days of work, a sum that, to anyone outside the movie business, sounds like the kind of payday only imaginable in dreams. But in Hollywood, where salaries are a form of status and every actor is painfully aware of what their peers earn, the numbers themselves are only part of the story. When Willis's team pushed back, asking for $1 million more for the same workload, the request hit Stallone harder than any scripted punch. For Stallone, who had always seen the Expendables franchise as a family, a legacy, and a labor of love, the idea that anyone would treat it as just another gig, just another check to cash, was more than disappointing. It was personal. Negotiations in Hollywood can be as theatrical as any scene played out on set. But this one unraveled quickly and publicly. Stallone, accustomed to overcoming obstacles the hard way and wary of anyone who put money before loyalty, refused to budge. To him, the demand for more was not a negotiation, but a betrayal, a challenge not only to his control of the project, but to the entire ethos of what the Expendables represented: brotherhood, sacrifice, and a shared respect for what it means to be an action legend. The decision was swift. Stallone drew a line and would not cross it, and with that, a professional partnership and a personal friendship were put on ice. What happened next became the stuff of Hollywood legend. With a single pointed message on social media, Stallone tore away the carefully crafted facade. Greedy and lazy, a sure formula for career failure. He never named names, but the world did not have to guess. The internet lit up. Entertainment shows replayed the tweet on a loop, and fans began taking sides as if the fate of the franchise depended on it. Harrison Ford was announced as the replacement, and what might have been a routine casting decision now stood as a public declaration. A star had been exiled, and the reasons would be debated in every corner of the business. The reaction inside the industry was immediate and intense. Insiders whispered that Stallone's move was unprecedented, that he had crossed an invisible line by airing grievances in public, and that even in a town built on reinvention and redemption, there are some wounds that are hard to heal. Some on the production side were shocked. Others quietly applauded Stallone for taking a stand, but everyone understood the stakes. When you are dealing with icons whose faces have graced 1,000 marquees and whose names can still move millions, every decision is magnified. The rumor mill churned out stories about tense phone calls, awkward encounters at award shows, and frantic efforts by agents to patch things up before the bad blood spilled into other projects. For Bruce Willis, the choice to stay silent may have said more than any statement could. While some wondered if he would eventually respond or fight for his side of the story, Willis kept his focus elsewhere, letting Stallone's words hang in the air. The press pounced on every appearance, every interview, searching for clues about whether the rift would ever be healed. Some claimed that Stallone regretted his outburst as soon as he sent it, while others insisted he believed he was speaking for everyone who had ever had a passion project dismissed as just another job. But as the headlines cooled and the next box office cycle began, both men receded into their own corners of Hollywood. The Expendables rolled on with a new cast dynamic and a slightly different energy. Fans noticed that the on-screen chemistry had shifted, that the sense of camaraderie felt more forced, and that the spark of seeing every legend under one roof had dimmed just a little. At the same time, Willis's absence became a kind of ghost presence in the franchise, an unspoken reminder of what had been lost, and what pride can cost even at the highest level. Beneath all the money talk and bruised egos, the real story became a lesson in how fragile relationships in Hollywood can be, and how quickly alliances can turn into rivalries. In an industry obsessed with legacy, every grudge can become an epic. Every slight can be reimagined as tragedy or farce, and every deal has the power to shift the balance of entire careers. Was it only about a paycheck? Or was there something deeper at stake, a sense of trust, a belief in what the project stood for, or even the last ember of a friendship that could have outlasted the franchise itself? The answer depends on who you ask and what you choose to believe about a world where everything is for sale and nothing is guaranteed. Years later, as the Expendables franchise continues and both stars carry on with new projects, the story remains a cautionary tale for anyone tempted to put pride above partnership. What, in the end, did Hollywood truly lose that summer? The right actor for a key role, or the last honest bond between two men who once understood each other perfectly? Would forgiveness have changed anything? Or is every headline in Tinseltown only waiting for the next twist to keep the audience hooked? And if you think that was the final word on the Stallone-Willis feud, ask yourself this: can even the toughest men find a way back when pride, reputation, and years of shared history are all on the line? Or is the real explosion not in the box office, but in the human heart, where some deals can never be renegotiated and some friendships, no matter how iconic, must finally fade to black? Fame, feuds, and the final act. There are Hollywood rivalries that are manufactured for headlines, and then there are those that run much deeper, fueled by pride, years of shared history, and the pressure that comes from living under a microscope where every slight can become an international incident. Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis belonged to the rare club of action stars who had survived for decades in a business that forgets most people after a single bad weekend. They had both played men who never quit on screen, who always found one last punch to throw, and who refused to accept defeat, even when the odds were impossible. For a while, it seemed like their real lives had followed the same script. They had been the faces of courage and swagger for an entire generation, the kind of heroes who could light up a movie poster with a single glare. When the Expendables finally brought them together, it was a victory lap, a chance for fans to see if all those rumors about mutual respect and brotherhood were real. The cameras caught the smiles, the banter, the quick nods between takes. What they did not capture was the slow, invisible tension that was already building behind the scenes. The mix of ego and exhaustion. The sense that one misstep could end it all. The money dispute that played out over the Expendables 3 was the flashpoint, but it was never just about dollars. In Hollywood, $1 million can feel like a mountain or a rounding error, but for stars like Stallone and Willis, it is often the symbolism that cuts deepest. Stallone saw himself as a builder, a director, a man who fought his way up from nothing and believed in loyalty above all else. Willis, who had weathered his own battles for respect after breaking out with a television show instead of a hard-edged action film, had learned to demand what he felt he was worth, no matter who was across the negotiating table. When the negotiations collapsed, it was more than just a contract dispute. It was the collapse of something personal, an understanding between two men who had once shared stories over drinks and laughed about the old days when studios would barely take their calls. The very public tweet Stallone fired off in the aftermath was as close to a punch as you can throw in the age of social media. It was not just an insult, but a message to the entire industry. The cost of crossing Stallone would not be paid quietly. The fallout was brutal, and it sent ripples across every project both men touched in the years that followed. Friends and colleagues picked sides. Agents worked overtime to keep their clients away from the crossfire. Rumors multiplied about who would be blacklisted from which party, which production office, or which lucrative franchise deal. The studios watched carefully, taking notes, knowing that the story would live on long after the Expendables faded from theaters. But time is a force no blockbuster can outrun. As the headlines cooled and the world's attention shifted, the feud began to shrink back into the shadows. Willis kept working, taking on roles that mixed his classic bravado with unexpected vulnerability. Stallone pressed forward too, sometimes reuniting with old rivals, sometimes returning to the roles that made him a legend. Yet the wound never fully closed, and fans kept speculating. Would they ever share a screen again? Could forgiveness find a way through all that pride? That question hovered for years, unanswered. Then life, as it so often does, threw a twist into the script that no screenwriter could have predicted. In 2022, Bruce Willis's family made a heartbreaking announcement. He had been diagnosed with aphasia, a rare and devastating condition that robbed him of his ability to communicate the way he always had. Suddenly, the tough guy who never let words fail him in movies could no longer rely on them in real life. The diagnosis sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Tributes poured in. Old clips of Willis delivering iconic one-liners or facing impossible odds began to circulate again, this time tinged with sadness. The man who had once seemed invincible was now facing a challenge no amount of grit could conquer. For Stallone, the news hit like a gut punch. In interviews, he struggled to hide his pain. He spoke of their friendship with genuine warmth and regret, making it clear that whatever had come between them, none of it mattered anymore. He talked about reaching out, about the sorrow of not being able to have the kinds of conversations they once shared. Even for someone as stoic as Stallone, the reality was hard to face. The final act had arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. As Hollywood reeled from the news, a deeper story began to take shape. One that asked viewers to look beyond the headlines and wonder about the nature of fame and the toll it takes on friendships. Stallone and Willis had both played heroes who could solve any problem with a well-timed punch or a clever quip. But life, as it turns out, is messier than movies. Sometimes the real drama is not about explosions or gunfights, but about finding the courage to let go of old grudges and to recognize that even legends are mortal. The lesson was not lost on their fans. Social media filled with messages about forgiveness and the importance of making peace before it is too late. Journalists and commentators revisited the long history of action stars who clashed in public but quietly reconciled in private, wondering if maybe this was just another chapter in the endless cycle of rivalry and redemption that keeps Hollywood spinning. But there is another twist to this story, one that is easy to miss if you only focus on the flash of cameras and the roar of the crowd. As Stallone and Willis aged, they both began to reflect publicly on their legacies. Stallone gave interviews where he spoke about regrets, about missed opportunities, about the strange loneliness that comes from always being expected to be the strongest man in the room. Willis, in his final public appearances, seemed to soften too, leaning into roles that showed a gentler side, a willingness to let others share the spotlight. Theirs was a rivalry born of competition, but finished, it seems, by a mutual understanding that time is the one enemy no one can defeat. Some say that The Expendables was the last time Hollywood will ever gather so many legends in one place. Others believe the genre will live on, reimagined for a new era, but with different faces and new stories. What remains undeniable is that the Stallone-Willis feud has become a cautionary tale, a reminder that pride can cost you more than a payday, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning a fight, but from learning to forgive. So what really kept them apart for so long? Was it money, ego, or just the endless pressure to always be the star? Or was it something deeper, an old wound that never fully healed? A sense that each man had paid too high a price for the fame that had made them legends. Could they ever have worked together again if things had gone differently? The answers may never be fully known, but one thing is clear. Hollywood, for all its glitter, is built on the same fragile human bonds as any other place, and the lines between friend and rival can change in a heartbeat. In the end, it was not a contract or a studio decision that kept Stallone and Willis apart. It was the inexorable passage of time, the quiet sadness that comes when you realize there are no more scenes left to shoot, no more scripts left to rewrite, and the only thing left to do is look back and hope that somewhere in the story you managed to get something right. For viewers, the real drama lies not in the films themselves, but in the lives of the men who made them, in the grudges that fester, and the forgiveness that, if it comes at all, often comes too late. Do you think Hollywood will ever see another rivalry as storied and complicated as this one? What would have happened if Stallone and Willis had found common ground before fate intervened? Would it have changed the course of action movies forever, or simply reminded us that, no matter how tough our heroes seem, they are just as human as the rest of us? The story of Stallone and Willis remains a living lesson, one that lingers every time the credits roll and the lights come up, challenging us all to remember what matters most. The story of Sylvester Stallone and Bruce Willis is a powerful reminder that legends are not made only of strength and bravado, but also of vulnerability and the choices that follow every disagreement. Their friendship was a symbol of everything fans love about action movies, from loyalty and risk to the thrill of seeing giants face off on screen. But the real lesson is found not in the explosions or the fame, but in the quiet moments where forgiveness tries to close wounds that pride once opened. As the years pass and new generations of stars rise, the story of Stallone and Willis stands as both a warning and an invitation. It asks what matters more in the end, a reputation or a relationship, a grudge or a chance to make amends, and whether the price of holding on to anger is ever worth the loss of a friend. If you find yourself clinging to resentment or regret, maybe their story will remind you that life is too short to leave apologies unsaid and second chances wasted. Take a lesson from these icons. Reach out, say what needs saying, and let go before the final curtain falls. And if the world of Hollywood has taught us anything, it is that true greatness often comes from the ability to move beyond conflict, to recognize the humanity in even the fiercest rivals, and to value connection over competition. So as you think about the journeys of Stallone and Willis, ask yourself who in your own life deserves that chance at reconciliation or a fresh start. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more untold stories and honest looks behind the scenes, and let us know which legendary Hollywood feud or friendship you want us to explore next. Your curiosity and engagement keep this channel alive and growing, so join our community and be part of the next great story.